You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
WSJ attacks Trump over dangerous message his MAGA-friendly move sends, based on an article by Matthew Russer. Trump is not negotiating NATO. Here's advertising retreat. The Wall Street Journal says Trump is calling NATO a ripoff while his administration pulls U.S. troops out of Europe and pretends the risk is someone else's problem. That is the surface story. The real story is simpler. The president holds the power, the Pentagon carries out the withdrawal, and the political message is strategic weakness dressed up as toughness. Power is the point. NATO does not run on mood. It runs on commitments, acing, logistics, and the credibility of American force. When Trump complains that the alliance is a bad deal while his administration reduces the U.S. footprint, he is not performing leverage. He is using institutional power to make a threat look like policy. That distinction matters. Trump can demand more European defense spending because Washington still anchors the alliance. But if he simultaneously strips away American forces, he is not building allied capacity. He is degrading the one asset that makes NATO real: U.S. leadership backed by troops. The decision was made in Washington. The Journal reports that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth bragged about cutting the U.S. presence in Europe to pre-2022 levels, including a brigade combat team redeployment and another 5,000 forces removed earlier this year. That is not an accident, and it is not confusion. It is an administrative choice. And it comes with a built-in lie that the costs of pulling back are somehow abstract, or future, or European. They are none of those things. Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. The administration is reducing conventional deterrence in the same theater where Russian aggression already proved it will exploit weakness. That is a decision with a known historical reference point and a foreseeable effect. Ripoff is a smokescreen. Trump's attack line is familiar because it is useful. Call an alliance exploitative. Call shared defense charity. And you can smuggle retreat into the language of fiscal common sense. But the Journal's own framing exposes the fraud of peace in Europe is a core U.S. interest, not a donation. The ripoff claim misdirects blame toward allies who are already increasing spending. The Journal says NATO members raised defense spending 20% last year. So the issue is not that Europe is refusing to pay. The issue is that Trump wants the political credit for pressuring allies while hollowing out the American guarantee that makes that spending meaningful. This is the standard Trump maneuver. He invents a grievance, converts it into a loyalty test, and then uses the resulting noise to cover a downgrade in actual power, weakening deterrence, then calling it prudence. The Journal notes the obvious risk if the U.S. cuts conventional forces in Europe. It has to lean harder on nuclear deterrence. That is not prudence. It is escalation by neglect. Conventional forces are not decorative. They are what make deterrence legible before crisis turns catastrophic. Remove them, and you force the entire burden onto a narrower, more dangerous layer of military threat. That is how the administration turns strategic depth into strategic brittleness, while pretending it is simply being hard-nosed. The same pattern appears in the talk about Europe building up their own military and defense establishments. Yes, Europe should be able to do more. But the administration is not patiently managing a transition. It is creating a vacuum faster than allied capacity can fill it. That is not burden sharing. It is abandonment with better branding. Putin gets the message. The Journal's most important line is also the plainest: pulling troops is a message of American ambivalence that Putin will hear. That is the political meaning Trump keeps trying to evade. He can sneer at Ukraine, belittle NATO, and treat European security as a nuisance. But adversaries do not need his stated intentions. They can read the structure of what he does. Reduced U.S. presence in Europe, contempt for alliance obligations, and open impatience with collective defense all signal the same thing: the United States is less willing to absorb costs to stop aggression. Trump may flatter himself that he understands hard power. The evidence in the Journal's account is the opposite. He understands power as performative dominance, not durable deterrence. That is why he can mistake withdrawal for leverage and sabotage for seriousness. The larger pattern, This is not just a NATO dispute, it is a governing pattern. Trump and his national security team create political theater around strength, then use that theater to justify institutional decay. They denounce commitments as scams, reduce the capacity that makes those commitments real, and leave allies, soldiers, and the broader strategic order to absorb the damage. The democratic lesson is not that Washington should beg for respect. It is that power without responsibility is not strength. It is a self-inflicted opening for authoritarians who thrive when the United States becomes uncertain, transactional, and easy to test. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Alternet for today's article. With the automated voice of Kristen, thanks for listening.